They say lightning never strikes twice in the same place, but heartbreak can, and so can grace. Barron Trump learned that lesson in a quiet funeral procession, standing in the rain for a man whose name might never appear in headlines. Yet there he was, coat dripping, Joe Riley's dog tag clutched in his fist. Captain Mike Riley stood nearby, bowed under his own regrets. The father's casket was lowered into muddy earth, and in that moment, Barron felt something shift inside him, like a door creaking open. 2 weeks later, Princeton campus Barron should have been celebrating. Commencement weekend buzzed with parties, families snapping photos, professors giving final congratulations. But his mind was far from mortarboards and tassels. Instead, he found himself at a small campus chapel, an echoing sanctuary with stained glass windows that cast fractured light across the pews. He sat near the front, alone. On his lap rested the old Bible, so worn you could see faint outlines of Joe's notes through the thinning pages. He ran a finger over that dog tag, reflecting on a soldier's final breath and the battered hope he left behind. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Barron. It was an acquaintance, Zoe, a fellow senior who wrote her thesis on war poetry. She nodded at the Bible. Hiding from the crowds, Barron's shoulders tightened. He was used to reporters, to cameras, to people wanting an angle. But Zoe's expression was different, empathetic. I'm not sure I belong at the celebrations, he admitted. Too much on my mind. You sure? The service is starting. She gestured to the small stage, where a student choir was assembling for a non-denominational prayer service, a chance for seniors to reflect before graduation. Barron thought of Joe Riley, thought of Mike, that tension in his voice when the call ended, how father and son found a fragile bridge, and how Joe left that final apology behind. Barron stood, stepping into line with the other seniors, the dog tag slipping beneath his shirt. He tried to sing along with the choir's hymn, but his voice trembled. When the service ended, Zoe gently touched his arm. Whatever's on your heart, you don't have to carry it alone. Barron swallowed. He had carried secrets all his life, the weight of a famous last name, the expectation to be someone rather than be himself. But Joe Riley's story sparked something else, a calling. He tucked the Bible under his arm and left the chapel, Mike Riley's house, suburban Virginia. Barron dialed the phone number from the dog tag for the 15th time in a week. Still no answer. He'd left voicemails, each more uncertain than the last. Captain Riley, this is Barron Trump. I was with your dad when I just wanted to check on you. He hung up, hearing only static. The last time they spoke was that desperate FaceTime call, Joe's final heartbeat echoing across the shelter floor. Barron tried again. Mike, it's Barron. I'm sorry, I just wanted to see if you're okay. No response. He sighed, sliding his phone away. The wind outside tugged at his coat. In front of him stood a modest ranch-style house, a neatly trimmed lawn, a single flagpole, with an American flag. Mike's place. Barron had discovered the address buried in old Veterans Administration forms that Joe kept in the Bible. He took a breath, walked up the path, and knocked. A woman answered. Brunette hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing an army t-shirt. Confusion flickered across her features when she recognized the tall young man on her porch. Can I help you? I'm, looking for Captain Mike Riley. My name's Barron. Barron True. I know who you are, she said quietly. Mike's not really up for visitors, especially not today. From inside, Barron heard a child's laugh. Maybe 4 or 5 years old. The woman softened a bit, seeing genuine concern in Barron's eyes. "I'm Gabby, Mike's wife. Listen, he's dealing with a lot. His father." She trailed off and Barron nodded. "I know. I was with him in his last moments." Gabby studied him for a long moment, then stood aside. "Come in." The house smelled like fresh coffee and old secrets. A small child peeked around the corner, eyes wide, then darted away. Mike. Riley sat slouched on a couch, TV remote in hand. He looked up, bristled. "You found me," he muttered. Barron nodded, stepping forward carefully. "I tried calling. I just wanted to see how you're doing." Mike's eyes flicked to the Bible under Barron's arm, the same one that had once belonged to Joe. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I'm doing just fine. Don't need pity. Especially not from—" He trailed off, swallowing the words that threatened to boil over. Gabby gave him a subtle nudge. "Mike, he came all the way here." "Just let it go, Gabby," Mike growled, then turned back to Barron. "You want me to thank you for calling the ambulance? Or for holding that old Bible?" He shoved up from the couch, pacing. "He said he prayed for me, for years. Didn't do squat. I was still alone, still fighting my own battles. You're too young to understand." Barron braced himself, recalling the anger in Joe's eyes when he spoke of God's silence. "Not here to lecture you, just to tell you. Your father wanted you to have this." He offered the Bible. Mike stared at it but didn't reach out. "He wrote letters to you. Prayers he never sent. It doesn't fix anything, but it's real, and it's all yours." Silence settled. Gabby looked at her husband with tearful eyes. A child's small voice echoed from the hall. "Daddy?" Mike took a step, took the Bible, then clutched it awkwardly. He exhaled a shaky breath, flipping through the pages riddled with Joe's scribbled notes, some dated as far back as 2005, others from just a year ago. Barron remembered the final verse scrawled in Joe's unsteady handwriting. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." Mike closed the cover gently. He never was good at speaking face to face. But this, I guess, is his version of it. A long beat passed, soft acceptance stirring in the corners of his eyes. Gabby cleared her throat. "Barron, would you like some coffee? We, could talk about Joe. I'd like to know more about his last days." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Meanwhile, at Joe's place, shelter rain hammered the roof of the newly renamed shelter, the same pockmarked building Joe Riley called home in his final chapter. Two volunteers were busy sorting donated blankets. A shaky fluorescent light flickered above the plaque. "For Joe Riley, who taught us that sometimes God's voice sounds like a stranger." A row of chairs lined the wall, each seat bearing a story. A runaway teen, a single mother escaping abuse, a veteran haunted by memories. A social worker passed around styrofoam cups of hot soup. Outside, a new sign glowed, "Joe's Place," courtesy of an anonymous donor. No one here knew the full story, only that an old soldier had died, and suddenly the shelter had enough funding to repair the roof, fix the heating, expand the kitchen. Lives changing quietly behind the scenes. In the corner, an elderly woman held a tattered King James Bible, reading to a shivering man who'd just stumbled in from the cold. Her voice was raspy but gentle. "He heals the broken in heart and binds up their wounds." Every time she spoke the words, it was like a promise. A small match struck in darkness, lighting a step forward. That evening, Barron sat alone in his dorm room, partially packed boxes stacked against the walls. He stared at his Princeton graduation gown, folded neatly, waiting. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I read the letters. Maybe it's too late for me and Dad, but Thanks for being there, Mike. Barron felt tears prick his eyes. He remembered Joe's final breath, how the soldier's fingers curled around that dog tag, how he whispered a verse even as life slipped away. Maybe faith wasn't about grandiose miracles. Maybe it was about showing up, answering a call, holding someone's hand at the edge of the cliff. He typed back, "It's never too late. Let me know if you need anything." He set the phone aside, heart pounding with a strange mix of relief and grief. Graduation was tomorrow, but his mind was already drifting beyond the ceremony, to a story he couldn't bury. Graduation day. Sunlight streamed through the ivy-covered arches of Princeton's campus. Barron wore his cap and gown, standing in line to receive his diploma. Cheers erupted as each name was called, families bursting with applause. When they called his name, Barron William Trump, he stepped on stage. Flashbulbs popped. He felt the burning gaze of cameras, half the world's eyes on him. Diplomas changed hands. Handshakes, applause, a swirl of color and noise. But through the commotion, Barron kept thinking, Joe's place. Mike Riley. Unanswered. Prayers. He held the diploma, a symbol of everything he'd worked for academically. Yet in his mind's eye, he saw Joe's trembling hands on that Bible. Another kind of legacy. He smiled politely for the cameras, then walked off the stage and, without warning, slipped through the crowds. He disappeared into the city, leaving behind reporters baffled by his abrupt exit. Later that night, Barron found himself once again in the Washington, D.C. Public Library, the same corner where he'd first discovered that hidden letter. A lonely overhead lamp flickered. He pulled the Pilgrim's Progress from the shelf, carefully this time, in case any more ghosts fell out. He read a few lines about a pilgrim burdened by sin, searching for the celestial city. The parallels felt too on the nose. Someone, weighed down by expectations, illusions of what life should be. Barron swallowed hard. He was no saint. He was just a kid, newly graduated, a name recognized worldwide. Yet maybe that name, that platform, meant he could do something real. Opening his phone, he searched for local charities, support networks for veterans, nonprofits that might collaborate with Joe's place. He sent emails, typed out texts, leaving messages for potential partners. He didn't know exactly what shape his future would take, only that it must involve more nights like this. Rolling up his sleeves, showing up where God might seem silent, bridging the gap. A month later, a reunion of sorts. Pine Grove Cemetery was peaceful at dawn. Dew glistened on the grass. Barron stood by Joe Riley's grave, hands folded, the dog tag dangling from his wrist. He'd come to say goodbye, but not quite. More of a thank you. You changed my life, he said aloud, voice trembling. I hope you see that somehow. A soft crunch of gravel made him turn. Mike Riley stood there in uniform, shoulders tense. He nodded at Barron, then placed a single white rose on the headstone. My wife says, God works in mysterious ways. He inhaled. Never believed it. Still not sure I do. But Dad's Bible, reading his words, I can't shake the feeling that something bigger was at work. Barron swallowed a knot of emotion, stepping aside to let Mike kneel. The captain brushed the gravestone, whispering something too low to hear. Then he rose. I'm transferring to a stateside post. Gonna help with training new recruits. Be there for my kid, break the cycle. He paused, giving Barron a tight nod of respect. Thanks for everything. A shared silence. Gentle. Almost holy. Two men, each carrying a piece of a lost soldier's heart, found a sliver of common ground. Years later, Joe's Place 2.0. The battered shelter had transformed. The cracks in the walls were replaced by fresh paint. The kitchen bustled, serving hot meals. A reading corner featured donated books, children flipping through them while volunteers read aloud. At the center of the main hall hung Joe Riley's portrait, laughing eyes, an old army uniform, with Ranger the dog at his side. Beneath the hue, painting, a plaque that read, "In honor of Sergeant Joe Riley, because sometimes God's voice is a stranger in a hoodie, a soldier's final apology, or a quiet act of grace." Barron Trump, older, more confident, stood near the sign greeting guests at a benefit event. He guided visitors through the renovated rooms, offering tours. Now and then, he showed them Joe's Bible, safely encased but open to Psalm 34:18. "It's a reminder," he'd say, "that faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a whisper asking us to keep going." Mike Riley appeared at the entrance, dressed casually, no longer weighed down by bitterness. His wife and son followed, bright-eyed, the child skipping into the main hall to see new friends. Mike caught Barron's eye and nodded, a quiet respect passing between them. The trust of survivors, of those who've walked in darkness and found a light. Quiet miracles. Some nights the old library is silent, dust motes dancing in the glow of a single lamp. A tattered copy of The Pilgrim's Progress remains on its shelf, minus the letter that changed everything. Yet if you look closely, there's a small bookmark in Psalm 91, the same passage that hid Joe's dog tag. Scribbled in the margin is a note, fresh ink shining. When God seems silent, he might be sending someone in your path. Don't miss it. No signature, just the faintest initial. BT, and somewhere in a corner of the world a lonely soul flips through a dusty book, stumbles onto a hidden message, and a spark of faith flickers to life once more. Because the real miracles, the quiet ones, are still happening, even when no one's looking. Joe Riley's prayers echoed forward. Barron Trump's small act of kindness carried on. And the cycle of grace repeats for those willing to strike that fragile match in the darkness. Maybe we'll never know the full ripple effect, but that's the beauty of it. Miracles so often wear the smallest disguises: a forgotten letter, a broken soldier, and the faith of a young man who decided to show up. And in the hush that follows, if you listen closely, you might just hear God's whisper, "I'm here in you."